All right, welcome back for video 3 in this segment of videos on cellular transport. So again, we just talked about photosynthesis and how that's an example of cell transport. We are transporting molecules across a cell membrane, specifically in the light reaction. Right now, we're going to be talking about another example of cell transport, which is called cellular respiration. So as a reminder, both heterotrophs and autotrophs will go through this process of cell respiration. So all organisms on this planet, whether they are prokaryotic or bacteria, or they're eukaryotic, so they're like us, you have cell organelles, you are a eukaryote, everyone is going to go through cellular respiration. All right, so cell respiration, its main job is to make ATP for our bodies. So this is where all of our cellular energy comes from. So remember, ATP is your body's energy source. The same way you put gasoline in a car to make it run, your body needs ATP on the cellular level in order to run. So we're going to be looking at how your body is able to make ATP, how it's able to make the energy it needs. So similar to photosynthesis, we have another equation for cell respiration. It's actually the opposite of the photosynthesis equation. So now instead of having oxygen and glucose as the products, they're now the reactants. So we are now using oxygen, we are now using glucose. And then instead of carbon dioxide and water being the reactants, they are now the products. We are now making carbon dioxide. We are now making water. And then, of course, we're also making ATP. We're making energy. So let's pause for a second, okay? In humans, oxygen comes from the air that we breathe. Glucose comes from the food that we eat. And keep in mind, we talked about the digestive system. So all your nutrients are absorbed in your small intestines through the villi, which means glucose too is absorbed by the villi in the small intestines into the bloodstream, where it's transported to your cells using the circulatory system. So we will get into more detail with that later in this unit, but just know that that's what's happening here. And then through the process of cellular respiration, we are making carbon dioxide, the air that we breathe out. And then we are making some water here, which we will either pee out or we will sweat out. And then, of course, ATP, which our body uses. Okay, so also cell respiration, it takes place in the mitochondria of the cell. So remember, all eukaryotic organisms have a mitochondria, both plants and animals, both autotrophs and heterotrophs have a mitochondria. That's where this process is taking place. And instead of being a two-step process, this is now a three-step process. So the first one is glycolysis, the second step is the Krebs cycle, and the third step is the electron transport chain. Something to note here is that through the entire process of cellular respiration, we are making about 38 ATPs for every cycle of cell respiration. So for every every molecule of glucose, we're able to make 38 ATP molecules. Or I believe every 6 molecules of glucose. I'm sorry. Every 6 molecules of glucose, we're making 38 ATP molecules. All right, so like I said, cell respiration takes place in the mitochondria of the cell. So here's some pictures of what it looks like. This is the cartoon version. This is what it looks like underneath an electron microscope. And then there's two parts of the mitochondria that we have to keep in mind. The first one is called the cristae. And that's these like folds of this inner cell membrane or inner membrane of the mitochondria right here. So see how they're all like folded up, these little folds. Those are the cristae. This is the location of the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain is going to look very similar to the light reaction in photosynthesis. It's the same idea. This is where we are moving molecules across a cell membrane to make ATP. We also have the matrix of the mitochondria, which is the space inside of this second membrane right here. So inside here would be the matrix, and this is the location of the Krebs cycle. Glycolysis happens outside of the mitochondria. There are two different types of cell respiration. So we have anaerobic respiration and we have aerobic respiration. Anaerobic. An means without. Aero is talking about oxygen. So anaerobic respiration is respiration without using oxygen. So we are making ATP without using any oxygen. For humans specifically, we are very bad at doing this. You might go into anaerobic respiration if you're doing like very intense exercise. You cannot do it for more than about 90 seconds. Or you can't do it effectively for about 90 seconds. So this is like your like hardcore sprint type stuff. This is if you're like working really hard physically, your muscles will start to burn. And that's because our muscles are making something called lactic acid. Keep in mind, acid, it's supposed to burn, low pH. So that's anaerobic respiration for us. Now, for other organisms, specifically for prokaryotes, for bacteria, they tend to use anaerobic respiration as their primary way to respire. Their process is called fermentation, and we're actually going to be doing a lab on fermentation hopefully soon. Can't give you a date. But we are going to be doing a lab on fermentation in terms of making a drink called kombucha, and it's very good at showing the fermentation process as well as cellular respiration. Anyway, so bacteria will make ATP without using oxygen. Things like beer and wine are made through this process of fermentation, and then we also can do bread and yogurt as well. Specifically yeast for bread, it helps the bread rise, and yogurt will usually have a bacteria culture inside of it. So those are all examples of food or drink that we have that uses the fermentation process. Now, aerobic respiration, aero again means oxygen, so we are respiring using oxygen. This is much more efficient. We're able to make much more ATP per a cycle of cell respiration. This is also what we usually do. So currently, like sitting wherever you're sitting right now at a desk, on the couch, bed, wherever you're watching this, you are respiring aerobically. And like I said, much more effective, much more efficient. And this is how we live our lives day to day. So when I'm looking at the process of cell respiration, I'm talking specifically about aerobic respiration, our normal way to respire. Like I said, this is a 3-step process. First step is glycolysis. Second step is the Krebs cycle. Third step is the electron transport chain. So again, we're going to be paying attention to the reactants and the products of each of these reactions so that we can see how we get the overall equation for cell respiration. So for glycolysis, this takes place in the cytoplasm of the cell, and essentially we are starting with glucose, and that glucose is broken down into a molecule called pyruvic acid. It's also broken down into what we call acetyl coenzyme A. You don't need to worry too much about those molecules. You need to know glucose, you don't necessarily need to know pyruvic acid or acetyl coenzyme A. So in this diagram, here we are right here. Notice that glycolysis does generate 2 net ATPs. So it might generate some more ATPs in that process, but some of them are also used in the process. So at the end of it, we have 2 ATPs that the body can then go use to do whatever it is it wants to do. The second step, the Krebs cycle, it's again going to take place in the matrix of the mitochondria. So that's in this area right here, or this area right here in between the membranes. So basically we are taking the pyruvic acid made in glycolysis right here. It's moving across the cell or across the mitochondria membrane, and it's also converted into that molecule acetyl coenzyme A. Now in the Krebs cycle, we take the pyruvic acid or the acetyl coenzyme A, and through this process of the Krebs cycle, we are making carbon dioxide. We're making some more NAATP. So notice it makes 2 net ATPs again. It's also making some other energy molecules, NADPH and FADH2. So these energy molecules are going to be used in the electron transport chain. Now the electron transport chain takes place in the cristae of the mitochondria. So that's these folds of the inner membrane right here. So very, like I said, it's very, very similar to the light reaction in photosynthesis, except this time we are using oxygen, so we're using the air that we breathe. We're using those energy molecules made in the Krebs cycle, and through this process we are making water, and we're making the other 32 to 34 ATPs to generate about 38 ATPs in total from all three of these processes. All right, so this is just a diagram to help us compare photosynthesis and cell respiration. Keep in mind the gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide, are generally in the atmosphere. This is showing us that for photosynthesis, plants are making the oxygen. We then go use the oxygen in the electron transport chain. Carbon dioxide is made during the Krebs cycle for cell respiration. It's then used during the Calvin cycle of photosynthesis. We also need to find water. So again, water is being no, it's not. Yeah, sorry. Water is being used during photosynthesis in the light reaction. And then water, where's my mouse? Why isn't this working? Water is then being made right here during the electron transport chain of cell respiration. When we're talking about glucose, during the Calvin cycle for photosynthesis, we make glucose. We then, for cell respiration, eat glucose and use it during the process of glycolysis. So again, this is just showing you sort of the similarities and differences, how we can compare photosynthesis with cell respiration. These processes do work hand in hand. So remember, plants are going through both photosynthesis and cell respiration. Humans, animals, we only go through cell respiration. And then again, to drive that point home, both photosynthesis and cell respiration are examples of cell transport. We're moving molecules across a membrane. In both examples, molecules are moved in, out, and around the cell. In order to move these molecules, the cell membrane must be able to allow the molecules to be transported by either passive transport or active transport. You can see this specifically in the light reaction of photosynthesis or the electron transport chain of cell respiration. In both cases, membrane proteins require ATP, so we're using active transport to move hydrogen ions across the cell membrane. Oh, too much. There we go. So, and this is coming back to cell respiration. So we're going from that micro and then looking at the macro. So we're going from the small part of it, so like what's happening inside the cell, to what's happening on the larger scale, maybe in an organism. So our bodies use cell respiration to make ATP, the energy our cells use. Please reference the chemical equation. So it's here again for you to look at. This again needs to be tattooed on the inside of your eyelids. We already know where and how glucose enters the body because we eat food. It's in our digestive system, and that is absorbed in the small intestines through the villi. But now we're going to look at how oxygen enters the body and is transported to cells through the respiratory and circulatory systems. So this is getting us ready to, like I said, look at those two different body systems. Again, pause for a second, make sure you have your vocab notebook with you, go through the slides, make sure that you are filling in the different vocab words in your vocab notebook, and I will see you back for the respiratory and circulatory system.